There are 33,000 people that are dying every year from overdoses. There is an urgency to come up with a solution. We are interested on the opioid issue in general from two perspectives as it relates to addiction on the one hand. Can we develop other medications that can be used to treat people that are addicted to opioids, and so that suffer from an opioid use disorder? We're also interested on developing formulations of currently available medications used for the treatment of opioid use disorders that would be easier for a patient to be compliant with, or will allow us to treat patients that are difficult to reach. For example, individuals that may be in a rural community where you don't have access to a methadone clinic or a clinician that can provide with buprenorphine. So in that respect, for example, extended release formulations can actually provide a very useful tool to manage an opioid use disorder problem. But we're also interested on expanding access to medications that can be effective in reversing opioid overdoses that are a resultant of more potent synthetic opioids, like what we're observing with fentanyl, or in certain cases even with carfentanil, for which evidently the naloxone doses that are used to actually revert an overdose from heroin may not necessarily be sufficient. And very importantly, we're interested in developing therapeutic interventions that can prevent an overdose. Because what we're observing is that an individual that has overdosed from an opioid has a much higher risk of overdosing again. And if you don't do an intervention, these individuals will overdose, and some of them, unfortunately, will die. So what is it that we can do to protect them? And the third aspect on our approach to address the opioid use disorders with science is to develop alternative treatments for the management of chronic pain that are effective and are not addictive. And this is very important because the opioid crisis emerged from a very good intention to properly treat patients suffering from severe pain. But we didn't have many alternative medications. And as a result of that, there became an over-reliance on in the prescription of opioid medications at such a level that actually so many prescriptions were given that it became easy to divert them, and then these were abused. And then on the other side, it also happened that patients with pain that were properly treated became also addicted to the opioid medications. And these two different routes generated and opened up the doors for the opioid crisis that we currently have. So if we want to contain the epidemic, because the patients with chronic pain are in need of treatment, and we want to prevent it from happening in the future, we need to solve the problem and need of those with severe or moderate chronic pain conditions, for which, as I say, there are very limited alternative treatment interventions. We are very interested on the concept of vaccine and monoclonal antibodies in terms of, can we generate a vaccine through which the person will generate antibodies that will then bind the drug in the blood, capturing it and interfering it from it to go into the brain, and therefore you will not be able to get high, and you also will interfere with overdoses because the drug will not get into the brain. And these vaccines have been tested in preclinical models, and they have been shown to be effective, in fact, in curtailing the entry of morphine and heroin, and actually fentanyl, into the brain. So we are at the stage now to get the toxicology data to accelerate. What is it that we can accelerate? What do we need to do to bring them and start to test them in the clinic? And in that respect, for example, we are particularly interested in expanding development of long-lasting monoclonal antibodies, which could actually, for example, provide a protection against overdosing from highly potent synthetic opioids, such as is the case of fentanyl, where it's actually other interventions have not shown to be very beneficial. So that is where we are at. It's more on the preclinical stage, but we do have clear-cut plans, and we partner with pharmaceuticals and with academic centers to accelerate the development. Two different strategies. Actually, we're working with two different vaccines for heroin, and we're working and trying to facilitate the development into long-lasting monoclonal antibodies for fentanyl. I would say that it's fundamental to recognize that when we have a crisis like this one, science, first of all, can come up with the solutions to solve it, but it's also in order to translate that science into product, the need to generate public-private partnerships becomes fundamental. So, and this is what we're trying to do through this commentary, to actually facilitate what is it that we can do to facilitate that transition. So we fund basic science and knowledge that is indispensable ultimately in generating treatments, but that road can take a very long time. So the concept is, what is it that we can do to accelerate it so it's not so long? Because we really don't have the time. I mean, there are 33,000 people that are dying every year from overdoses. There is an urgency to come up with a solution. And so how do we maximize that likelihood?